Welcome everyone to our Crafting Futures panel conversation. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, please take a moment and make sure that your phones are in silent mode. We would like to begin with the words of Chief Seattle. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Let's now acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So again, thank you for being here. My name is Jenna. I run Learning and Engagement here at BIMA, and I'm going to pass the mic to our Chief Curator, Greg Robinson, to introduce the panel and give an overview of our exhibition.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming. I wanted to first give a little context for the exhibitions we have this year at BIMA. And what I think I'll do is I'll have each of you, as you get up to talk, you'll introduce yourselves, and then they'll be able to see your face in the light up here a little better than there. This year is called Handwork. It's a year of craft. Carol Sauvignon, who founded Craft in America in Los Angeles, was also on the board of the American Craft Council. I'm a former board member of the ACC as well, and she was talking with other board members about 2026 coming up, being the 250th anniversary of our country. And they were talking about, wouldn't it be great if there could be a focus on craft and have people talking about a lot of the early art that is known in the founding of America and beyond. So Carol Sauvignon went around the country talking with people and said, if we did this, would you be in? And Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, we've known Carol for a long time. Cynthia Sears, our founder, knew Carol and bought things from her freehand gallery in LA. So we've been in conversation with her since BIMA was founded. And we said, yeah, we're in, and we're in all year. So what you're seeing is a whole series of exhibitions starting this spring and then summer and then fall and winter combined. And I won't go through all of that. That's available on our website. But I did want to give you just kind of an overview of it. Today we are going to have a panel discussion focused not so much on the exhibition upstairs, Crafting Futures, but also hearing from people representing different organizations around the region who they think is interesting, what does emerging mean, et cetera. So, but I'm going to just give you a little bit of overview. Donna Davies, the executive director from Pilchuck Glass School, Betsy Hagestedt, Betsy right here on Bainbridge Island at Barn, and also working with Cynthia Hibbard, our art committee chair. They're both board members of Pratt Fine Arts Center, and we're doing Pratt's 50th anniversary exhibition this fall. Ed King, director of Pottery Northwest, and Daniel Wallace, also with Northwest Designer Craft Artists. And he's going to be speaking today about James Nelson. James was our summer intern for a couple of years, and I've sort of been joking, but I really kind of mean it. I'm still kind of irks me. James was inducted into Northwest Designer Craft Artists last year, at the age of 24, and he's a master woodworker. I'm 68 and I just became honorary member. So it's like, this is an upside down world, believe me. So anyway, Jenna, who is Senior Manager of Learning and Engagement here, you've been here now how many years? It's just been great working with you on all of these programs. Thank you. And so here we go. I'm just going to give you a very brief overview. Upstairs, we have a show called Crafting Futures. It has 9 artists. It's not the typical Greg Robinson group show. I love to have 40, 50, 60 artists, but often you only get 1 or 2 pieces from each artist. And this time, I thought it was interesting to kind of see the variety of work that an artist does, one, to make a living. Some have bread and butter pieces, and then also larger, more technical work. Some have just evolved themselves over time. Jackie Mosley, who I kind of joke is perpetually emerging because she is so curious and wants to try so many things that it's not a attention deficit or anything. It's just she literally wants to keep moving, and she will always be emerging. We have Ian Lawrence from the Suquamish tribe. When I approached him, I found out through his mother, Barbara Lawrence, who's involved here with BIMA, and Barbara's very involved in educational programs and things, that he did paddles, and he actually carves a paddle for each graduating senior who is a Suquamish member. They don't have to live here. They could live anywhere. I got very curious, but he didn't consider himself to be an artist. He was a paddle maker, so initially he didn't think he would be in the show or should be in the show. So that's emerging in a whole different way. Anyway, you see the names of the 9 people here, and upstairs you'll see a diversity. It is not a survey of the craft world. I didn't try to squeeze every kind of thing people do, but I really wanted to focus on a group of artists, and we could learn more in depth about each one. And some of them were recommended by different groups, like Stephanie Tienko, who's here today. Amy from Blodell first recommended her for the Blodell show that we did within the last year or so. And then, of course, she's very involved in Barn. And I really like her work too, so she's on the BIMA list. So anyway, we're not fighting over these people. It's just that we're all very excited. So I won't go through in detail everybody, but I wanted to give you kind of a feel for the show. You see in the middle of this slide on the pedestals, Peter Jacobson's glass work of a smaller scale. We actually have it in our museum store. Jordan Reigen, who is our store manager, recommended Peter for this show. We were also familiar with him through his Hilltop glasswork and Museum of Glass work. The big dolphin skeleton in the foreground here hanging is his as well. Jacob Foran, who runs all the art programs at Lakeside School in Seattle, has done a variety of ceramic work over the years, and you'll see that upstairs as well. Emerging doesn't have to be that you're young and compelling at this point, that you're starting to pay attention to your work more, but it could also be that you just have not had the visibility that you really deserve. And a lot of these people are working in the arts, working at Barn and working at Museum of Glass, and they have full-time jobs doing other things. So hopefully this show will give a little more visibility. I'll let Daniel talk more about James. This is a piece that is getting a lot of attention from visitors in the show. This is one of Jacob's pieces. And I mentioned Stephanie. These were in the Blodell show. And then look at the mastery of lamp working that's emerging and with her techniques. And this one is admittedly more organic in concept and intent. But this one also shows that Stephanie's gotten this ability when when it's really a flower petal or a rosebud or something like that with this tiara piece. I mentioned Ian's paddles. Brenda Smith is the painter who also works with Ian on a lot of his paddles. And this is examples of Jackie. The room upstairs is divided straight down with movable walls. And the Emerging Craft show is on one side, and on the other side are just samples from our permanent collection. We've been open 13 years, and I hadn't really intended to do this when we started out planning this year, but we've actually been collecting through donations. We don't have an art acquisitions budget, but through really amazing donations from all kinds of people, artists, collectors, estates, we have been able to put together a pretty good craft collection. Some of these pieces, like Elizabeth Donnelly Davidson's ceramic pieces, actually came right out of her exhibition here, and others have been donated. Also in the building as part of handwork is George and David Lewis's retrospective. Chris Maynard, which wasn't really planned as part of handwork, but it really is, the feather guy. The most frequent email or phone call I get starts out something like this: "When is the feather guy coming back?" I've been waiting. So we asked him to come back. Amy Lee from Cleveland, Ohio, Aaron Zona, our artist book curator, has put together a beautiful show. This is a solo exhibition of someone who's devoted to Hanji, the Korean paper making process, and uses it in artist books and all kinds of things. And she literally makes all of her own paper from scratch by hand, and then makes all of her work by hand. So it's my pleasure to have Donna Davies from Pilchuck Glass School come. And I just like to say, you'd think we'd all, hung out all the time together because we'd have so much to say to each other. But, people just don't get out and about that much. So it's really fun to have you here and to do this today. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And yeah, Greg's right. I think when you're an executive director and you're busy wearing a lot of different hats, you'd think that we all get together, but we're busy. So it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and talk to you about two of the emerging artists that I chose to speak about this afternoon. Beginning with Min-hee England. And I will first share with you that the two artists that I've chosen to talk about today were both Halberg Fellows. And the Halberg Fellows are named after John Halberg and Anne Gould Halberg, two of our three co-founders of Pilchuck. Of course, we were co-founded in 1971 by Dale Chihuly and the Halbergs. And so we have a Halberg Fellowship. And after the pandemic, Min-hee and Bree Chesler, my second artist, were both Halberg Fellows in the year just following as we were reopening after COVID. And we hadn't opened at 100%. And so these Halberg Fellows literally had the entire 55-acre campus to themselves. And for us as staff, we had this incredible dialogue with them on a daily basis. And when we're running sessions, we have, at any one time, 100 people on campus. But here we had essentially 6 year-round staff people and 5 Halberg Fellows. And so it really developed these deep conversations. And so I feel a lot of heart for these two women in particular. Min-hee England is an artist based in South Seattle, and she this is a piece from Light the Forest in 2024. This is the third installation of Light the Forest that we have on our campus, which happens in early November. And Min-hee was invited to do this installation, which was a brand new body of work, and that for Light the Forest in that year. So this was one piece that was installed. She found this location on campus that she felt very strongly about, and it's neon, obviously. And Light the Forest, I should say, is a neon exhibition. It's site-specific installations on the campus chosen by the artists. And it's a self-guided tour on campus when you come up, and it's really wonderful. This body of work, Min-hee developed after visiting South Korea at the home place of her mother and the home place of my mother. And so Min-hee and I have shared a lot of this story, this deeply personal story, and we both went back to South Korea actually for the first time ourselves. And we were saying how you feel this sense of vibration when you're on your mother's homeland. And so she found the as you tour the temples in Seoul in particular, which she and I both did on separate occasions, that there's this repetition of line which feels very soothing, which feels very beautiful. And so she was picking up these patterns and created this site-specific piece that you can see from both sides. And I just found it just really remarkable as a visual image, that sort of, and it feels very similar also to the repetition of line that you find also in Pacific Northwest Coast imagery as well. And this bold red color, it just punctuates the negative space that you find in an open campus. So this body of work I thought was incredible, and I should say that we have chosen Min-hee to be the invited artist for this year's Light the Forest. So she will have 55 acres to herself. And I asked her recently, because she gave a lecture in our Seattle space, and I said, how are you feeling about the way you're approaching campus as a blank canvas? And she said, I'm so glad you asked that, because it's completely changing the way she's thinking about her own work, also in a three-dimensional way. So I'm so excited. Please come. And I think what's fascinating about Minhee is that she is, her work I find it's not singular, but she's exploring and she's really immersing herself in so many different ways using the material of glass. And this piece actually incorporated sound and her voice, and she took it to this location, which if I'm remembering correctly, is in Utah. So she put it in her car and drove it out, and it's looks like a glass holograph, but she also incorporated sound. So she recorded herself singing in this body of work and then took it out into nature and placed it, which I also find really fascinating, because as a grad student, I thought, well, at the time it was called land art, and now it's earthworks. But I just find this multi-sensory approach to the work is really fascinating, because she's using glass, but it's not just focusing on the material itself. Second artist, Bree Chesler, who was also a Halberg Fellow with Minhee on campus that year. And interestingly, these two women also lived together in South Seattle. They're not partners in life, but they are best friends. And I find it so interesting that their work is so vastly different. Bree is from South Florida and initially focused her work on metal when she graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute, but has found glass later in life. But you can see how if someone were to ask me about Bree's work, I immediately think she's a maximalist. I mean, it's just so much color, it's so much shape, it's so much, there's so much dimension. She finds her work deeply personal, coming from challenging the notions of beauty, the preconceived notions of beauty. You find a lot of biological forms also in her work. She also incorporates neon, much like Minhee. They're sort of immersing themselves, like I said, into not just blown or cast, but neon or flame working, and really embodying and immersing herself in color and sensation. Sensation is very important in Bree's work. She talks a lot about growing up and both of her parents having mental health, but also, some other health issues, and it really has informed her own work and how she approaches it. So you find these very sort of, like I said, biological and fantastical is kind of what I think of Bree's work, and you see a lot of biological forms incorporated, human body forms. And, really approaching it just as like purely, I feel like I feel so much sensory when I look at it. I feel like I'm touching it, even though I'm not, but I just feel like I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm feeling the roughness and the furriness and the hair. And, but also just feels so fun and just freeing and very liberal and I find that she approaches things in also just a very painterly way, but she's using this glass material in a way that just feels like it's so freeing and very painterly.
All right. So I'm Betsy Hagestedt. I'm the programs manager at Barn. And if anyone here has not visited Barn yet, my experience of being at Barn has had a huge impact on my involvement with emerging artists at all levels, really. Barn is open to all different levels of experience. So you get we'll say, true amateur or experimentalist right next to someone who is working at a professional level. And it is the opportunity of using professional grade equipment for a wide range of different art forms that really makes the difference in feeding people's creativity and encouraging people to interact with one another and experiment in new ways and see what else is out there. So my first artist is sitting here in the audience today. I did warn her. So Katie Levitt is a Barn member, and she came to Barn originally as a ceramicist. We at Barn don't have ceramics yet. We will. But there wasn't a ceramic studio for Katie to work in. And she has been playing and experimenting with all different art forms. But she really gravitated to fiber. Our fiber art studio has very robust programming in a wide range of things. So weaving, basketry is what grabbed her. And the basketry has really gone to the next level with Katie's experiences. She uses waxed linen to create very structural forms, but using the same very traditional basketry techniques that you would see in more natural materials. So I have enjoyed very much watching her progression, and she started teaching this as well. She has recently been featured in Fiber Arts Now. So if you would like to see more of her work, it is in the Fiber Arts Now Winter 2026 edition. And this work has really been informed by her experiences interacting with other people. Is that fair to say? Yes, she's nodding. That opportunity to try new materials, try new methods of construction is really something that I love to see. That is one of my passions as an arts advocate, is to see people getting the opportunity to try different materials, work in new ways, and interact with other people. So my second artist also highlights this interactive tendency. Sherry Gamble is an artist who works down in Bremerton mostly. She has a place called the Mud Lab in Bremerton now. She is a plasterer by trade. And I think this is one of the things that I would like to highlight is the fact that many emerging artists are working in other industries. They are finding other ways to pay for life. And sometimes art ends up being put aside when you have to make ends meet and pay your bills. So Sherry has worked in a wide range of materials. Obviously, this is cast glass. This is one of her earlier pieces of cast glass, and she has recently come back to it. So she had a piece at the CVG Gallery down in Bremerton during their juried show this past year. A beautiful crown constructed of, I believe they were arrowheads that her father had collected. She had cast a number of glass arrowheads and put them together. She works in all different materials, though. And the other wonderful thing about her is she has also taken her experiences of being able to dabble in the arts and has focused on mentoring others and bringing them into the arts as well. So she runs something called the Arts Hive, Bremerton Youth Arts Hive, encouraging youth to also participate in the arts and begin to bring themselves up to a professional artist level, teaching them what they will need to know in order to show at galleries, work within the arts industry, teach others their skills, and really find their own way in the world of the arts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed King. I'm the Executive Director of Pottery Northwest, and we are Seattle's longest-running nonprofit ceramic institution. We're really proud to say that we're 60 years old this year, and just a little plug, we are relocating, so we're going to be in a new facility in South Lake Union, hopefully, knock on wood, November 1st. So when we have a big grand opening, come out and party with us. One thing I'm really loving about Pottery Northwest is the commitment to watching artists pursue their clay journey from zero skills all the way up to professional exhibiting artists and beyond. And this is really important because you get into that discovery phase. What do I want to make? Who do I want to be? What's my fingerprint? And the exploration, the discovery, the experimentation to find that fingerprint that makes your art uniquely yours. And the other thing that we do that really just gives me a sense of pride is the mentorship of when somebody asks a question or says, what about this? How do I exhibit? How do I show? That we have an ecosystem that supports that through gallery exhibitions or through markets or through support. And I picked two artists that are two sides of that coin. I wanted to start with somebody who I really love seeing in the studio, Ruby Fulgham. Now, right now you might just be seeing a mug. What I'm seeing is somebody who spends countless hours over years taking a lump of mud out of a bag and perfecting both in wheel and in hand building how to arrive at a product that over the years has developed into a rock solid exhibition portfolio and sales for financial vitality. And like was just mentioned, I think it's notable that Ruby does have to pay her bills, has to have a career outside of the arts. So some of the mentorship and opportunities that we provided, like 24-hour access to the studio through an apprenticeship program. She works a little for us and gets 24-hour access. I've watched over the years Ruby develop that skill set that has put them in a really attractive position. When we're at Seattle Art Fair, sales. The downtown market, sales. Artist markets in our studio, in our gallery, sales. And what's interesting is watching them experiment with product mix, pricing, engagement with collectors, sizing, small things, big things. It's been incredible. So what I see when I look at this photo is the development over years of arriving to something that is both central to what they want to make at the intersection of what her collectors want to bring home. And I think intent is a big part of the journey here. Some people can come in and create gallery level work but go, I don't ever want to show, I just want to have fun. And other people say, I want this to be my life. I want to dedicate my passion to this project. I see that in Ruby and so many others in the studio. And it's magical as a leader watching that decision happen, knowing that one day they're going to step out of that job scenario because their income from their artistry will be their sole source. Ruby's on that cusp. And I find that their emerging journey is compelling. Ruby's a young person. And so they've got a lot of time to continue this journey. I find the other artist really interesting as a case study. Russ Strada retired from his career and came to Pottery Northwest with an interesting story that because of a heart condition and a surgery, it's like, I need something that calms me. I need something that just brings the temperature down in life. And ceramics does that for me. But then Russ's journey for health and healing through clay actually led to exploration and a journey inside of his own passion towards a thesis. And I would walk by his maker's table for the last couple of years. I'm like, you're onto something. This will elicit a reaction from an audience. And if you keep this up, galleries are going to be interested in this. And lo and behold, over years, Russ developed a style and a fingerprint recognizable. It was technically interesting to watch how he took raw clay and made that into what you see before you. And then the offers start coming in from galleries in Seattle, New Orleans, San Francisco, and to watch him, even if they're, lower level shows, the offers are there, the exhibitions are there, and the sales are supporting that vision as well. And I'm like, this guy's on his way. From a healing journey to an exhibition and gallery journey, the work and the dedication in the studio and the intent to be focused on that outcome, that thesis, that's something that really stood out to me. And to be honest with you, I wish I had one of these in my house. And those are my two artists. Thank you very much.
Hello all. See some familiar faces. I'm Daniel Wallace, Executive Director at Northwest Designer Craft Artists. If I was a foot shorter, yeah, maybe, how do we do this? Is this better? Yeah? So Northwest Designer Craft Artists was founded in 1952 by a group of craft artists here in the Puget Sound, and since then it's expanded to work with artists throughout the Northwest region. We don't have a particular craft discipline that we work with. It's anyone working in a handcraft medium, so long as it's recognizable as craft. It doesn't have to be functional, but it does work with the traditional media. We are a member-run organization, so everyone who's in NWDC has been voted in by members who have previously been voted in. So it ends up being a group of master craftsmen, which was interesting with this prompt because emerging in a group of artists who are often silver-haired was difficult. But this year we got it's actually a group of younger applicants. So I chose two artists that were recently included in our membership this year who are emerging. But what, like Greg said, emerging maybe in life, but not in their practice, or the other way around, that they've, come into their own with their practice. This first artist, James, who I'm seeing here, I didn't give him a heads up that I was going to talk about it, but I couldn't help it because you've seen the show in the exhibition here. I think that there's just something striking about the precision and the confidence in both the choice of materials, the choice of the wood, combining these woods, and also creating a family of objects that live together as sort of in communication with each other. It's very clear that the works have been made by the same artist. I think that's something that emerging artists sometimes struggle with, is having a consistent voice, that their body of work is reflective of them as an artist. You can see the work and immediately tie them to that work. And I think James is well on his way to having this, like, a vocabulary of form, of material that is specific to his practice. Also, this body of work reminded me something that I had not really thought about with furniture design, but another member of ours was giving a talk, Seth Rowland, who is a woodworker here in Washington, and he was talking about how a piece of furniture grabs the floor or interacts with the environment, that it has a weight or a personality outside of our function, but how it relates to the architecture of the room, to the environment. And I feel like this body of work, you can really see James paying attention to those legs, how they touch the ground, how they support the mass of the object. Just very refined, beautiful. And then next, I wanted to do someone working in fibers. So this is another of our most recent members, Elise Wood, also lives and works here in Seattle. She studied in Oslo, Norway, as well as at the Glasgow School of Art. Not only are they just sort of strikingly beautiful objects, but recently I've started working with a textile archive in Portland called Textile Hive, which is a collection of 50,000 textiles that have been collected from all around the world, some as old as 500 years. And one of the things that Elise does is she uses what she calls heritage fibers. So it's a mixture of, new fiber and also fibers that she's found by deconstructing things that she's collected, whether it's old tapestries or clothing and painstakingly deconstructing them to the thread and then incorporating them back into these tapestries. She's also combining different techniques, both digital jacquard and hand knitting and weaving. She also recently started incorporating a vintage 60s knitting machine that she rebuilt from scratch. And so all these pieces are a combination of both new media, new technology, and very precise, painstaking handwork. I think that's good. Let's open it up to questions and talk about more art.
You were talking about digital weaving processes, and there's a lot of, when we talk about emerging, there's also a changing world and changing technologies and everything. And we can get into, what is AI going to bring or allow or things like that. But within your organizations, what are you seeing in terms of emerging, like what's changing? Donna, what was really interesting about what you presented is you're showing installation work and conceptual work. Glass has moved beyond the object, although the object is still extremely important and highly collected. But what are you seeing at Pilchuck? And you've been there now how many years?
This is my 7th year.
Okay, and even within the 7 years, like what's happening in terms of emerging or changing art forms?
Yeah, well, certainly the pandemic. But that's informed a lot of work, right? And so I think there's strong narratives that are coming through. Because like you said, and for us with glass, at Pilchuck, the whole mission is still very true to what Dale Chihuly created, which is that you are to push the material of glass to its brink, let's say, right? It's all about experimentation. You're not going to come to Pilchuck and make pieces for your show at BIMA. You're going to make pieces, here's a funny little story. Marge Levy, our former executive director, passed away, and the auction house said, can you come identify some of these pieces from Marge's estate? I was like, well, I'll try. And I get there and I'm like, what was I thinking? It's a bunch of blobs, because when people come to Pilchuck, they're just trying things. So I'm like, I don't know who did those. You're going to have to call the people who were here in 1985, because they're just trying things, right? Like, you're not going to find an amazing Jenny Ruffner lying around. It's like, it's a blob. And so I think what we're seeing is that people are really leaning into that narrative, and glass is almost, it's not glass first as a material being blown or cast. It's like secondary to the narrative.
That's interesting. And what about each of you? Daniel, what are you seeing? And I know emerging isn't really the lane that NWDC is driving in all the time, but
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that artists aren't working with emerging techniques or technologies or ways of looking at material that would be an emergent, contemporary way of looking at a less contemporary media. As far as digital techniques,
She wants you to eat the mic.
oh, yeah, okay. Very few of our members really engage with digital process. Many are working in a more traditional way. That being said, I think the fiber artists in our group are the ones who are really pursuing a collaboration with machine and new technologies, both in developing the patterns, right, the punch cards or the grid or the patterning for a weaving, but also I'm thinking of one of our members, Julia Rapinoe, who's working with a digital loom, but acting as sort of the human element within that. So she's interrupting the process and doing handwork and then restarting it. So it ends up being this sort of strange, broken image that you can see that there was this precision from the mechanism, but also the sort of romance and whimsy of her hand in that process. Those are just the first things that come to mind with that.
it seems like textile, fiber art, and ceramics are booming again. They're just, glass keeps expanding in terms of all the different ways people can use it. But, I used to think in terms of certain things, peaks and valleys over the decades, like the 50s and 60s versus the 80s and 90s. But I see a lot of artists working in that. So how about at Pottery Northwest?
I mean, we're serving 500 people every 10 weeks. Last year, if we add up every enrollment and every workshop and everything we did, I think 2,700 served in 2025. There is a boom. There's a hunger. And I think for me, when it gets into the technology conversation, we could talk about AI all day, but when your hands are, wrist deep into wet clay, it's both a mastery of the skill of the piece in front of you, but also the journey inward of what are you manifesting through this clay journey. And so it's repetition. You get the lump, start again. You get a hockey puck, start again, right? You pull a wall and it flips over and it just like melts, try again. And so it's an engagement of patience. It's an engagement, it's meditative. And that is the quality of healing and the internal connection to self that I don't think technology or AI or any of these contemporary buzzwords really satisfy when you're got a lump of clay right in front of you, right? And so when people say, what are you going to do when AI comes for your job? I'm like, you're not coming for a clay studio.
I think satisfy is a defining word in terms of what we all are striving to help people do. I had a recent tour, beautiful tour with Betsy Carol Sauvignon from Craft in America, was up here and wanted to see Barn. And we were just blown away every time I'm in those doors, and your tech lab down to the hands-on shops and everything. I think that whole organization is emerging, like growing, and it's, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we absolutely are at a point of really emerging. We're looking at expanding the building right now, or growing. So we're possibly going to have ceramics. We're looking at things like hot glass. It'll be a really exciting time in the next few years as we expand into new materials, new methods. I think it's going to inspire a lot more conversation. And that's what we've been seeing lately as well. There's a lot more collaboration between studios happening. That discussion and interaction is increasing more and more. So the tech lab, for example, is a really hoppin' place right now. We've got a bunch of glass artists that are there printing different elements. They're going to incorporate 3D printed bases into glass lamps that they're preparing to teach. So there's just a lot going on, and that interesting line of having lots of technology in the building. We're a little bit on the makerspace side of the more techie makerspace, but we also have a lot of those elements of a more traditional craft school.
For all the people using it, it's so clean. I mean, it is really, really clean.
Thank you to our volunteers who clean up after themselves.
Okay. Daniel, you mentioned something about the functionality of craft art, but also the materiality. And what's interesting, the exhibition upstairs, both the emerging side and the permanent art collection side, we're kind of pushing this idea of what is art and what is craft. But historically, materiality was a defining factor, and there's kind of been this hierarchy in the art world. Like clay, glass, fiber art, jewelry, wearables, contemporary. A lot of museums have very high-end decorative arts from several hundred years ago, but they don't carry contemporary art. Tacoma Art Museum is the leader in this region on that, and we're hoping to take their nod and also expand a contemporary jewelry art collection. But what are you seeing, and this is open to anybody really, what are we seeing about this blur between art and craft, or the hierarchy of materials? Like, glass is no longer the stepchild or at the children's table at the big banquet.
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct is that it really isn't a hierarchy of material, it's a hierarchy of how it's being used. Like, you can find artists working with extremely sort of poor materials, but in a way that is elevated to, high art with a capital A. The art craft debate is one that I just don't even know how to start or how to end it. Like, I'd rather it just be, isn't that a wonderful object? Instead of, and that if art is this thing that is subjective to your experience, then the viewer can decide whether or not it has the gravitas of, deserving of elevating to art with yeah. But then again, it's like, it's also kind of a bad way to speak about craft in that it's not worthy of, of praise or of being said that it's, on par with that. And this is why NWDC was founded, and part of why I think the members who started it had this vision was, it was at the same time that America was trying to start to export contemporary art as a sort of cultural export, defining America as the, what's the right word? At the forefront of defining culture. And the people here were saying, well, why can't craft also be treated like that, to elevate it to something that's an international export? I also have a history of working with artists that engage new technologies. So my particular personal attachment to one media over another, I don't really have that. I think that you can have something made from a traditional fine art material that functions as craft, and something that's made from a traditional craft material that functions as art, and I don't know. And also with the inclusion of design or, I don't know. I think it all blurs together, honestly.
I'm sort of at a point in my life, I'm thinking of quality or reaction to if something moves me, or I just think I'm thinking more of, do you spell it with a C or a K? Because there are some, I have some relatives who do a lot of craft with a K, and they love it and it moves them, but it's just not, I don't think it's gonna make it to BIMA. So.
At the same time, I had a hot minute trying to make a living teaching knitting and garment construction, and the difficulty of being respected as a professional instructor working in fiber was really fascinating to me. So there are still some areas that are given less respect, largely because of their history as art forms that were mostly done at home. We have a long history. I won't start ranting about the patriarchy on stage.
No, but that's a good point, though. I think that a lot of, and we find that in NWDC too, is that we are a group that's overwhelmingly feminine and also attracts, people from the LGBT community, because it is that sort of history of handwork being feminine, especially in textiles and jewelry making. And I think you can't ignore that has some power in diminishing it historically.
Well, and functional often was domestic, things used domestically too, and that, historically is tied into that. I think Joyce Scott, when I was on the board of the American Craft Council, some of you have heard this story, but Joyce Scott, the amazing artist from Baltimore, was on a panel, and this is the year 2000, and I think we're in Santa Fe. I know we're in Santa Fe, and there was a panel of mainly academics, and then Joyce Scott, about what's the difference between art and craft, and everyone sort of, talked, in sort of the standard ways. And then it got to Joyce, and she said, well, I've sold my work as art and I've sold it as craft, and the only difference I've ever seen is several $1,000s. So I think I think this still persists, and hopefully there won't ever be a panel discussion dealing with that maybe in 20 years or more. It just will become one big blur.
I think it's really fascinating. You said the word design, and I think that's something that I've seen in my career prior to Pilchuck when I was running the SOFA art fairs, which stood for Sculpture, Object, Architects Functional Art. And it was a joy to run that for 10 years. And Chicago was our hub. And those who were, a lot of press, let's say, were like, oh, it's sofa, so we're going to go find a bunch of sofas there. And what was really interesting was that sofa was cut by Mark Lyman, my former boss, because there wasn't a venue for those galleries and those artists in the other traditional art fairs, of which at the time there were only like 2. Now there's, too many. But sorry, personal opinions coming in. But it was really interesting that sofa sort of was like the ugly stepchild of all the other art fairs, but they were killing it. And so the collectors were coming in, and like Joyce Scott said, it just grew and grew, and there was this growing evolution. And then suddenly, what was an ugly stepchild was now suddenly some of those artists were now becoming design darlings. And so now we find that that's because we're hosting a design conference on campus this August, and there's a really interesting sort of high art craft discussion, and I'm doing this because of that hierarchical conversation that is resurrecting itself, I find. And I find it also personally very similar to the conversations that are happening with indigenous art, which for historically that work so design centric and relegated to anthropological museums and not being put in art museums. And I think that's also having a resurrection like craft has over the same trajectory.
I'd like to add to that. I'm so glad that you said that about indigenous art, because as a person who lived 30 years in South Florida, I could tell you that you could see when the Florida Highwaymen, for example, were relegated as African-American artists. And then when there was a market that was identified that could profit from their works, suddenly found work or art made by those who were considered not contemporary, not experts, then become in vogue, profitable, and in galleries. And so I think leaning into your notion of like maybe years from now, there won't be a panel discussing art craft. I think it's also responsible for us to take a look at what markets exist, what forces. We're talking about gallerists, right? And so there's vested interest when you go to art fairs in Tokyo, Dubai, here, Seattle Art Fair, Art Basel in Miami. There's industries dedicated to making sure that bright line between art and craft exists so that they can define a value and determine winners and losers. And unfortunately, for too long, craft or indigenous and BIPOC and women have been relegated outside of that conversation unless it was in the financial interest of the gallery and high art scene in quotes.
I think now you've touched something that I need to mention.
Yeah.
I was a commercial gallerist for many years, and one of the things that I think you're right about is that I think one of the thing that I've noticed within the craft community is that it's often centered around sort of continuing a legacy and bringing the way of making or the love of the material to a, not that it's bought or sold, but that you're trading it with your community. It's not to be profited off of necessarily, right? It's much more about teaching the next generation the importance of this way of working, which you don't really get in, as a singular commercial artist. You're not going to teach the way that you make to your artist's assistant, because then you're losing the power of your name, which is the thing that is valued by the commercial art world. So I think there's a stark difference between the individuality of the fine art commercial market and the sort of community of craft.
I want to come back to this idea of emerging, because it's been something we've been thinking about a lot with this exhibition, as intentionally not aligned with age or a traditional timeline. And so I would love for us to explore, like, what does it even mean when we're saying emerging now? That a lot of these hierarchies, both between art and craft and also of where you are in your journey as an artist, emerging or more evolved.
I think, people hear emerging and immediately assume that it means young artist, which it doesn't. I think emerging can be somebody who at any stage of their life and their career has decided to shift and explore. When you first sent the email to us about choosing two emerging artists, and I'm like, oh, how do I choose? How do I choose? And I immediately thought of an artist who came to Pilchuck, Charlotte Rogers. She's a Scottish artist, and she's in her, well, we joke, we're about the same age, we're in our early 50s, and she embraced motherhood and academia, and then has sort of come in and out. But she's still at this age and at this stage in her career, even though academically she has, gone very far in her career in studying glass, but she still is very much in that stage of as an emerging artist. You should check her out. She's doing these really cool things with foam glass, and it's really fascinating. And then on the other spectrum, is an artist who is young and embraced himself into the material. So I think you can be mid-career and decide I'm going to shift from ceramics to fiber or whatever, or you could be a young artist. It's just that you're exploring something new at whatever stage in life.
I just want to jump on to that and say, I think the other thing with emerging implies that you're coming into the public, coming into the market. And there are lots of people who have been making work for their whole life, and it just hasn't been their choice to make it so publicly available or to pursue it as anything that's going to bring them compensation. And so emerging is also sort of, I think it's on our side that they're emerging. You know what I mean?
I go back to what I said at the podium. I believe strongly in intent, right? And where you're going to place your passion, where you're going to put your 24 hours, and when you decide to have a conversation that's external from your studio, whether it's from a gallery or market, exhibition, whatever, that your thesis is no longer a private journey, and that you intend on having a public engagement and watching that unfold over both the mastery of your skill and the years dedicated to developing a following, and then hopefully that transition where the financial vitality allows you to step away from whatever your career is, whatever's paying your bills, into full-time artist. Then you can emerge into mid-tier and professional and exhibiting, et cetera, et cetera. Intent is one thing for me, but also potential, right? Is that there's something in the work that has the ability to grow and thrive and builds a basis and a stepping stone. I look for that when I'm seeing artists, Ruby in particular, when I was just getting to know them and I saw them working, I would walk right past them and go, that's a pile of money sitting right there. They don't know it. They're just doing their thing. But I'm like, that is a gold mine. Later, years later, watching them bring in collectors, bring in that financial vitality, and they're starting the light bulbs going off like, oh, there's potential here. Not just drive, but there's a future here. I think that puts them in that emergent category.
And when you mention the collectors, I mean, there's this whole ecosystem out there that is necessary for, this world to survive. And I thank the collectors so much. We took a group of BIMA circle members to Seattle for a day and started at Traver Gallery. And I actually, full disclosure, I worked for Bill to help him start his Tacoma Gallery years ago. And I just have, loved what he's done over the years. But I was just feeling it, and I had to say it when we were there. And I said, Bill, you don't toot your own horn as much as you should, because this entire glass world that we know, the contemporary studio glass world, not just regionally Pilchuck, of course, has been such a center, and Pratt Fine Arts Center and different studios letting people work year-round has contributed so much. But the early investments, the cash flow problems, the galleries he started, on and on. But there's this whole ecosystem. And I think the more that and we're part of it, all of our organizations, and the more that we can all see that we need each part, and we need to, reinforce and thank each part for being there, because that's what's going to keep artists, I think, thriving. I have one question. I spent the afternoon, part of it, with Virginia Causey, who's well known to NWDC and Pratt, and I met her when I was at Pratt Fine Arts Center years ago. We're talking, you mentioned COVID and just the hit that it's had, but especially on wearable art as well, jewelry, more high-end things, because we had a booming jewelry world here. Well, Karen Loreen with Ficeri Jewelry Art was a big part of that. But I'm just wondering where are artists maybe having, besides some wearables, like where are artists struggling, or how's the world changing? Maybe not as interested or open to what they're doing. Or is it just all one big happy,
I do agree that there are some areas of art that are seeing more enthusiasm right now than others. I'm just trying to think of what areas we see the most excitement about, or what is a little bit quiet at the moment. And I think it's a very hard thing to say, because a lot of the level of interest is driven by individuals who are active at any time. For what I'm seeing at Barn, as far as instructors or activity in our studios, it really depends on the personalities that are active and the personalities that are helping to drive a sense of community and encourage other people to participate in different art forms. So there might be other opinions out there, but I think the individual impact makes a big difference in what is thriving.
Like at Barn, the people who choose to run the gallery on a volunteer basis and show up over and over, like kind of your...
People who are running the different studios, for sure. We have almost cults of personality around certain people. Oh, so-and-so is running open studio today. It's packed. Everyone wants to be there because that's the person to hang out with. Often it's a really powerful instructor, someone really who has the knowledge and is willing to share it.
Yeah, and this is, I'm glad you said, I was trying to figure out how to verbalize this, but you were talking about COVID, and I think that's a big part of the struggle that it brought. Was there is sort of a draw to the personality of the artist, or the way of working, and that you're wanting to be in direct contact with that. And with COVID, it disrupted all of that. So I think that the personalities that are better at drawing in a crowd, there's a crowd that's thirsty for that.
Oh, I think too, talking about emerging artists, something that came to mind is part of it is, I think, the artists themselves, because it's that confidence level, that belief in themselves too, of you see me, you see my work, you see where I am in my career, so that's then they see what's reflected in the collector base, the gallery base, the museum base, who's recognizing their work. And then it's almost like I find sometimes that the artists are the last to recognize that they've been found. Yes, they've been found, and they're, it's like, oh, when they're just doing it all along. But I think COVID for sure has, if they had that momentum and that discipline, let's say, to continue with the practice, I mean, it helped. It wasn't just artists, all of us, depended on who you were as an individual, and some have been slower to come out of that. And I think, sadly, for what we've seen in some of our community is that Seattle's just gotten really expensive. So coming out of COVID, they're relocating to places where it's a lower cost of living for them to then pursue their work.
and the cost of materials. I mean, that's something I was speaking with someone who he had spent his life as a glass artist. He was, now in his 70s, but he's finding he was demoralized by not noticing so many young glass artists. But it requires a team of people, and a huge space, an incredible energy output, and so. Yeah, like how do you become an emerging artist when you require all of this prerequisite? And so with something like ceramics or something like fibers, the entry level, the barrier to entry is much lower than something like jewelry making or glass.
And that's part of where places like Barn and Pratt really shine, is that they give opportunities to access those pieces of equipment, especially that are far outside the financial reach of an individual. But if they are open to the community and available, this is one of the reasons Barn is so special, is it has that open studio model. You can come in and use the equipment. You don't have to invest $30,000 in a
Well,
sewing
and
machine.
all the safety issues related to the art as well. You can do jewelry at home, but it's really good if you can go to Barn and start to learn how to use a soldering, the torch and everything. So I'm thinking maybe now we can turn the lights up and open it up to questions too. So
Absolutely.
and we can still ask each other questions. And I want to thank, I think that's Rebecca back there. Thanks, Rebecca, for helping with the AV and everything.
And if you do have a question, please wait for the microphone to be passed to you so we can all hear it and so that the recording will capture it.
If I could begin the questions, then this one is for Betsy. By coincidence, tomorrow I have an appointment with Keith LaPlane at the Barn, who is a volunteer, and he's gonna help me with a family project and use the laser cutter. So thank you to the Barn.
I was curious when you were talking about the different ways that things called art and things called craft are valued. How much of it is just utility? Are crafted objects valued less because somebody can actually use them?
I'll start this one. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who is an incredible artist. He makes quilts, and they are now very highly valued. Joey Vanderkamp, he has a piece at SeaTac. He has shown in galleries across Seattle, and he's really offended by the fact that people will no longer use his quilts on their beds. He says, it's still art, even if you use it and throw it in the washing machine. It's okay. It really is. So I think that line, when you move out of the craft delineation, I spent so much money on this, but I have to protect it. So it becomes very difficult for people to understand the boundary that they are placing on something, I think.
That I have a friend who I acquired a painting from, and he said, "Don't you dare frame it. You're just supposed to use thumbtacks and put it on the wall." That's how I made it. And I thought I liked that. I was thinking what you were talking about with the elevation of art and craft among two things. One, among many indigenous communities around the world, no matter where you're from. Originally, there's no separation spiritually with art and craft. Everything we don't need those words because they're irrelevant, right? And then we get into needing to have some sort of hierarchy and way to identify ourselves with status, and that's where I think jewelry came in. The things we wear that say, and some clothing, the things we wear, so they're craft, but they're also status markers. So I find that an interesting sort of, I don't know what, I just had to say it.
Yeah,
I
no, I
think
mean,
that-
you're reminding me,
Sorry,
sorry to jump in
please.
there. I think part of the thing that people get hung up with craft and art is that art is meant to communicate something, and craft oftentimes doesn't, right? It's functioning, but it's not communicating a concept. It's not speaking to you individually. But I think traditionally that the sort of historical craft was doing both of those things. It was telling a story, it was representing a person, it was communicating an idea, not just, an object for you to carry your baby in, but it represented your family lineage, your connection to each other. I think that you're right that the art with a capital A that's been commodified is really more of a tool to assign value rather than the other way around, right? It's not valued because it is fine art. Does that make sense?
I have to tell you that I'm from the school of everything is art, right? So the glasses on this table are art, the chairs we're sitting in, the clothes, everything is art. Context matters, intent matters, but also you don't have to subscribe to what popular culture says about it. And so somebody could look at a 10-day Wiley and say, well, that's worth $1 million, right? Good for your wallet, great, right? But we as individuals also have the agency to decide what worth we're going to put on something. I know there's a store in Seattle that sells $800 shoes. Not every definition of functional and communication are relevant to every person engaged in that transaction, right? Whether that's going to come into your house or into practice or into your garden. And so there is a world out there that commoditizes this language, that there's business models based on this language, galleries run on this language. But us as individuals can say, I'm going to step in or out of that context at my own comfort. And that's the young punk rock version of myself that I still carry today when I come to work every day. And I'm like, we don't have to accept any of this. What are you passionate about? What drives you? What makes you feel good? And you can feel free to jettison all the, Queen's English around art and just say, what's punk rock today for me? And then bring that into your life. I find it to be much, much more calming than have to say I have to live in this box that was invented by someone thousands of years ago. Forget that. Oh, look, I got a clap. That's awesome.
It seems to me that these days, with the access to technology, to the blending of different cultures, to YouTube videos on how to make anything right now, that we're seeing more and more combinations of mediums and a focus on material in any particular medium. Painting is no longer painting, it's collage, it's 3D, it's sculpture, etc. And I think you see that across the disciplines. And I just wondered what anyone has to say about that.
Yeah, I love that question because I think that's exactly right. But I think there's also something going on, and I find it so fascinating, right? It's like, oh, you're a painter, you're a glass artist, you're this. And when I was in school, I wanted to, when I decided I wanted to write my master's thesis on contemporary indigenous glass, the art history professors were like, what do we do with you, weirdo? And I'm like, what am I, nobody's writing, I'm not gonna go take French and German, none of that old or art historical stuff is written in, in the books. It's like, it was very, delineated, right? So I was coloring way outside the lines, and I think that's what's fascinating right now is you see a lot of coloring outside the lines, which I think is fantastic. I also think there's a deep move into, let's get back into the old stuff that nobody's talked about for a really long time. We're teaching a Victorian sign painting class on campus for the second time in the last 2 years, and I could fill that class 10,000 times over. And it's so fantastic, an old technique that's coming back up. And a professor from Wales is coming over to teach this class. And everyone's clamoring to get in this class. Stained glass is coming back. I had my staff holiday party yesterday, and we did seed beating. And what was really fascinating even to watch my staff is, you know, we were working with designs, which the instructor had created with using AI. And then I was like, and I was following that because I was doing this very complex I decided I was, you know, I'd never done it before, but I'm like, I'm going to go for the hexagons. And, you know, I had like 2 rows and my staff went off script and they're just like doing it. And, you know, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. They just were just being very freeform and creating designs, but using seed beads. It's really, I think so I'm seeing those 2 things for me personally.
Yeah, I think we are seeing so much collaboration right now as well, which also speaks to that same sort of experience of moving beyond a single medium, a single technique. I think there is that drive for traditional, historically based art forms. People have a very strong sense of nostalgia right now, and some of that is in reaction to the technology we are all immersed in every day. So there's sort of this dual thing going on. We want our tools that make it easier to get to the part we like doing. We also want to be doing things with our hands. We want to understand the traditions behind them.
And I think that the information available to learn how to do whatever you want to do is more than ever before. So let's say you studied as a ceramicist. I think that, 40 years ago, you wouldn't have so easily come across other ways to engage with other materials. And there's really no barrier to that now. So why not? If you're interested, like the artist that you brought up, working in ceramics, who's now making baskets. It's a great example,
Katie.
Rebecca, there's a question over there.
So I wanted to come back to the idea of artists putting their own value on their work. And I find that to be one of the most challenging parts of being an artist or a craft person, however you want to say it. So I'm just curious if you have any advice or feedback or thoughts on how artists should value their work, especially for those of us who are working in mediums that are traditionally craft-based mediums but want to be seen as fine artists.
Artists as entrepreneurs, artists as people creating financial vitality through their hands, through their work and their passion has been something I've talked about for the last 20 years. And the number one question in any professional development workshop that I've ever been a part of is, how do I price my work? The number one question, doesn't matter what state, doesn't matter what art form. And here's the most unsatisfying answer is, what number do you need to hit at the end of the year? And we know that for everyone, whether you're working in a tire shop, you're a surgeon, you're a craft artist, the context of your life is going to demand different numbers. And so some people, if they're at the gallery level and a gallerist determines this is going to be the worth, this is what we're going to sell, these are the collectors, the context of those collectors can afford this, and every gallery is going to have a different level that they could sell your work at, there you go. And it might be decided for you. Or if you're, let's say, independent, do it yourself, you're going to put up your own website and decide your own work, some people might say, oh, you should make $50 an hour and do it off an hourly, right? You should do it based on your materials. The most unsatisfactory part of this is there is no answer. It's all about context. I keep using that word because it just depends on your situation. I used to live off my art. I would make it, I would sell it, and it paid all my bills for a long time. And my model, I know with my peers, we would compare our numbers, compare everything. My model was not the model that my friends used, and their models were different, and they had kids and mortgages, and I was a bachelor, right? So we had different numbers we had to hit. It's an impossible question to say, like, oh, this is it. You should charge this, and it's good for everyone. What I would say, though, is a lot of people say, how do I get to be successful as an artist? And I go, have you taken any business classes? Do you know what your P&L statement looks like? Do you know what your expenses are? Do you know your material cost? Do you know who your clients are? Do you know what kind of dogs and wedding rings they have at home? You know, really understanding your market and your business, like literally your art business, are key factors in understanding the context that you can create for the numbers that you need to hit at the end of the year. As someone who's been successful in that, I can tell you, I spent more time on business than I did creating art to make the art work. And I think that's the most important thing I could tell you today, is master your business so that you could be an independent, functioning artist.
I have one thing to add to that. I always have something to add after you say something.
Yeah.
It's true. Which is also, I'm not thrilled to say this, but from my time working as a gallerist, those measurements of how much time you're spending, the cost of your materials, these things, yes, factor that in for yourself. But at the end of the day, it really is much more about how things are being received by others. And I hate that, but it's true that especially now, we're in an attention economy, right? And so if you get the attention of a certain class of collector, a certain group of museums, that it's the value of the work is sort of relative to your persona. The you as an individual are the most important thing to the work. And sort of a lot of the collectors we worked with, I thought of their purchases as sort of buying stock in the future of that artist.
100% agree.
I think there are price point, when I've worked with artists, and a lot of people have, I've been on the gallery side, I've been on the art center side, I've been on the receiving side of lots of appraisals, having worked on a couple of permanent art collections here in the Museum of Northwest Art. But when artists are starting out, there's also sort of a price point that hits a sweet spot, because you want people to buy the work. You want to value your work well, right? And not have it undervalued, but you also want people to own it and to hang it in their home and have other people see it. And so there's sort of like, what is the motivating factor here? Is it to get, I remember at Pratt years ago, there's a bronze facility, and the beginning bronze students, you talked about blobs. There's a lot of bronze blobs in the art history, in the art center histories. They would want to put their first piece they ever made, a bronze sculpture, donate it to the art auction. And they'd get advice from bronze artists, and they'd say, well, we kind of charge our work by the hour and whatever. Well, your first bronze piece is going to take you 24 days, to learn the mold making and all on and on and on. And I remember one time an artist had a little thing like this, really, it was just an organic shape, and figured out that would sell for $800. And I said, I don't really think so. They put it in. I said, you can put whatever you want, but if you really wanted to sell, I think it was their aunt that bought it for the guaranteed maximum bid, more than that, because they came to the auction and bought the piece. Anyway, I'm not sure that was the best lesson learned for that person. But I think that's part of this structure too, is like, are you motivated to make it because you have to, or are you now also in a marketplace and you have to also survive on it? So it's a lot of different factors.